The night sky is alive with static. Somewhere above the North Sea, waves of radio pulse through cloud and darkness, invisible, endless, indifferent. They touch wings, clouds, the cold surface of the water, and return changed. To most, it is only noise. To one man, it is language. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing. And tell us where you're listening from, or which image lingers with you the most. Because tonight, we're stepping into the quiet war, the one fought not with fire, but with reflection, the one where sound becomes sight, and illusion becomes survival, the one that changed the course of the sky itself. You're listening to echoes of war. You hear it before you see anything, a low hum, almost like breathing through metal. Then the faint sweep of a green line across a circular screen, the phosphorescent afterglow fading, pulsing again. In this quiet room, buried beneath layers of wartime secrecy, a handful of men stare at the glowing circle as if it were an oracle. Each blip that flares and vanishes could mean a life, or a ghost. R.V. Jones adjusts a dial by a fraction of a millimeter. The sound shifts, a whisper, a tremor, then steadiness. Around him, air smells of ozone, ink, and cigarette ash. Somewhere above ground, bombers drone toward targets he will never see. But here, in the stillness between transmissions, he listens to war itself breathing through the ether. You might think that war is fought with weapons, but it isn't. Not always. Sometimes it's fought in silence, in the patience to listen, in the courage to deceive. Outside, London's blackout holds the city in its arms. Street lights are covered. Windows are sealed with tape. The only light left belongs to rooms like this: intelligence offices, radar huts, laboratories where the air hums with voltage and exhaustion. Every heartbeat of electricity feels like hope distilled into frequency. On another coast, far across the channel, German radar operators sit before their own glowing screens. They, too, are listening. They, too, are afraid of the silence between signals. One of them leans closer, taps his earpiece, and frowns. There are too many echoes tonight. Too many returns. As if the sky itself were fragmenting into hundreds of phantom wings. But that confusion has been designed, and the man who designed it sits now in this dim British room, his eyes steady, his mind measuring distance and deceit in the same breath. R.V. Jones never fired a gun in this war. He preferred wires to rifles, waves to walls. His battlefield was made of equations, frequencies, and fear. He was the man who taught Britain how to hide in plain sight, and how to blind the enemy with his own reflection. The first time he saw a radar screen, he thought it looked like a heartbeat, a pulse against the dark. He said once that the war was a contest of perception. Whoever could see without being seen would survive. And so he began his quiet campaign, to make the enemy see what wasn't there, and miss what was. You can imagine him there, thin, sharp-eyed, a mind moving faster than words. He scribbles notes in the margin of a report. They believe what the machine tells them. He underlines it twice. That sentence will become his weapon. The hum deepens as the radar warms. In another room, a Morse key clicks. In another, someone counts seconds between echoes. The night is full of listening. If you stepped outside now, into the cold English air, you'd hear almost nothing, just the sea wind and faintly the tremor of engines somewhere far away. Yet the world beneath that silence is alive with invisible movement, signals bouncing from metal wings, interference blooming like flowers across a radio band. The war is happening in frequencies, not flames. And still, somewhere deep in that calm, Jones hears possibility. He imagines a sky filled with phantoms, planes made of echo and light. He imagines German operators staring at their screens, watching impossible formations appear, vanish, appear again. Confusion becomes a weapon sharper than steel. He calls it the trick. But it will soon have another name: Operation Window. Chapter 1: The Mind in the Shadows. The day begins not with sunlight, but with paper. Stacks of it. Grey folders marked most secret, edges curled from damp London air. Somewhere in Whitehall's maze of corridors, footsteps echo like distant rainfall. A typewriter stops, starts again, stops. The war has turned information into oxygen. Everyone is breathing it as fast as they can. You stand in the doorway of an office that smells of dust and tea leaves. A clock ticks too loudly on the wall. The man at the desk does not look up right away. He is bent over a report covered in handwritten calculations, as if the margin itself might yield an answer the page refuses to give. That man is Reginald Victor Jones, 27 years old, Oxford physicist, quick-witted, slightly impatient, the kind of mind that listens faster than people can speak. When he finally looks up, his expression is mild, almost shy. But the eyes betray something else, a brightness that rarely blinks. He did not ask for war. Few scientists do. Yet when the first Luftwaffe bombs fell on Warsaw, and Europe's lights began to go out one by one, Jones understood that science would not remain neutral. Equations would be drafted into service. Curiosity would become a kind of weapon. Recruitment by curiosity. It started with a telegram from the Air Ministry. Someone in intelligence had read his doctoral work on infrared detection and thought, perhaps this young man might hear what others miss. They needed a physicist who could think like a spy. Jones arrived carrying a briefcase full of notebooks and no clear orders. Within days, he found himself in meetings where generals talked about mystery beams the Germans might be using to guide their bombers to British cities. The newspapers called them death rays. The panic was almost electrical. He listened, took notes, and said quietly, "If there is a beam, we will find its frequency. If there isn't, we'll find the fear that invented it." The room fell silent. The general in charge smiled for the first time that week. The job was his. From that moment, Jones became the nerve between science and subterfuge. He would spend the next 5 years trying to understand not only German technology but German thinking, to anticipate invention through empathy. You can picture him late at night, bent over a wireless set, headphones pressed tight, a cigarette burning down to paper ash. Every faint click and hiss might be the start of a pattern. He listens, rewinds the spool, listens again. The war is in the background. The sound in his ears is the war itself, stripped of noise. Echoes from the enemy. By 1940, radar was no longer rumor. The RAF's chain home towers lined Britain's coasts like metal reeds, each humming with invisible vision. But across the Channel, the Germans had their own systems: Freya for early warning, Würzburg for precision tracking. To Jones, these names were not threats but invitations. He began collecting fragments, intercepted radio bursts, reconnaissance photos of strange dishes near the Frisian coast, pilot reports of sweeping lights in the sky. From these scraps, he built a mental model of the unseen battlefield. "You must learn," he told his small team, "to see with other people's equipment." And they did. They plotted imaginary lines across the map, guessed ranges, calculated pulse lengths, tested them on captured gear. Each time their numbers matched a German report, they knew they were close. One night, while analyzing a captured receiver, Jones noticed something odd. The pulse spacing matched the frequency used by British navigation aids. He leaned back, exhaled smoke, and whispered, "So, they listen to us as much as we listen to them." War had become a conversation of echoes. The Battle of Brains. Intelligence work rarely feels heroic. It feels like paperwork drowning in static. Yet from this monotony, small miracles appear. Jones's first triumph came during what the British press called the beam scare. Rumors spread that German bombers were guided by radio beams crossing over targets like invisible scissors. If true, the threat was deadly. If false, the panic itself could paralyze command. He proposed an experiment. A small aircraft flew at night through suspected beam paths with a receiver tuned across frequencies. When faint modulations appeared, Jones recognized the signature of a Lorenz navigation system, a civilian technology the Germans had adapted for bombing runs. Within days, his team devised a countermeasure: transmit a second, stronger signal slightly out of phase, enough to bend the German guidance by miles. Bombers meant for London dropped their loads harmlessly in fields. The newspapers never learned why. It was his first true trick. He didn't invent new power. He invented doubt. And in war, doubt is often deadlier than bullets. You might wonder what courage feels like in work like this. No trenches, no medals, only the long ache of concentration. It feels, perhaps, like staying awake while the rest of the city sleeps, because somewhere in the dark a pattern has not yet been solved. The burden of knowing. By 1941, Jones was head of scientific intelligence for the Air Ministry. The title sounded grand. The office looked like a storage closet. But from that cramped room, Britain learned what its enemies could see, hear, and believe. Every report he filed changed someone else's orders: where bombers flew, which cities blacked out, which scientists were funded. The moral weight of each calculation pressed heavier than the hours themselves. Sometimes he walked home at dawn through empty London streets, his mind still full of echoes. Milk trucks rattled past, the smell of bread rose from unseen bakeries, and he thought how ordinary the world remained despite its danger. The trick, he told himself, was to remember that all this, light, noise, warmth, was what they were fighting to protect. In those moments, even the static in his ears sounded human. The war's technology would grow faster than anyone imagined. New frequencies, new counter-frequencies, a ladder of invention climbing into the dark. Yet at its base stood one quiet engineer who believed that understanding the enemy's mind was the first act of defense. And so, each night, while searchlights combed the clouds above Britain, R.V. Jones sat beneath their pale reflections, charting invisible constellations of sound. He could not stop the war, but he could change the way it was heard. Next would come the idea that turned sound into shadow, the illusion that would fill German radar screens with ghosts and rewrite the mathematics of fear. Chapter 2: Eyes in the Dark. Night after night, Europe became a laboratory for light that no one could see. Searchlights carved slow wounds across the clouds. Tracer rounds arced like molten threads through rain. But the real experiment, the one that would decide whether cities lived or vanished, was taking place in rooms sealed from daylight. You can almost hear it: the hum of cathode tubes warming, the faint crackle of circuits coming alive, the low mechanical heartbeat of a rotating antenna. Radar, radio detection and ranging, was still a fragile miracle, a device that could see with ears, that could turn air into glass. The first towers. In 1939, long before Jones learned its secrets, Britain had already stretched a net across its coasts. They called it Chain Home, 20 steel towers facing the sea, each bristling with wire and promise. At dawn, they looked like skeletons of forgotten cathedrals. At night, they whispered to each other across fog and tide. Operators, mostly young women, sat at their screens, tracing faint lines of green, calling out bearings with steady voices. Contact at 40 miles. Moving fast. Altitude increasing. Those few seconds of warning were life itself. When the sirens wailed over Dover or Hull, they were echoing the language first spoken by those invisible beams. R.V. Jones admired the system, but he also saw its vulnerability. Radar revealed, but it could also be deceived. The same physics that let Britain see the enemy could allow the enemy to see Britain. Every invention was a mirror, every advantage an invitation. He once described radar as a war fought by blind men learning to see, and he intended to make the other side blink first. The German eye. Across the Channel, another kind of light was being born. In hidden laboratories near Berlin, engineers built the Freya radar, sleek, efficient, elegant in its menace. It could detect incoming aircraft long before any observer could lift binoculars. Later came Würzburg, a smaller, more precise system, its dish turning like a listening ear toward the sky. German officers boasted that their Kammhuber line, a chain of radar zones stretching from Denmark to France, made their night defenses impregnable. Each sector had its listening post, its searchlight battery, its fighter pilot waiting for a voice in his headphones to say, "Now." In theory, it was flawless. In practice, it depended on one fragile assumption, that what appeared on the radar screen was real. You watch one of those operators now, a young man named Carl, uniform pressed, eyes tired. The room smells of ozone and tobacco. He traces his finger along a faint arc of light, believing it to be a bomber squadron. He calls the coordinates. Fighters scramble. But by the time they reach the position, there is nothing there, only darkness, unbroken and absolute. He blames the weather, the machine, his own exhaustion. He doesn't know that the ghosts he's chasing are already part of a plan forming in the mind of a quiet English physicist across the sea. A duel of perception. For Jones, the radar war was not a matter of power but interpretation. He studied each intercepted signal like a poem written by an enemy mind. Sometimes he could tell who designed the device just from the rhythm of its pulses, an engineer's personality encoded in microseconds. When reports came in of the new Würzburg installations along the coast, Jones realized Britain's bombers were flying into a grid of invisible crosshairs. If the Allies wanted to survive, they needed to turn the enemy's certainty against him. He began experimenting with controlled interference, tiny bursts of noise broadcast at just the right moment to bend or blur a radar return. It was delicate work, like playing an instrument tuned to fear. Too strong, and the signal vanished. Too weak, and the deception failed. Each success felt like a whisper through the dark. They see what we choose to show them. Listening to the sky. In 1942, Jones visited a coastal radar post during a night raid. The wind cut cold from the channel, and the sky above was a bruise of violet and ash. Inside the bunker, a woman's voice reported contacts, 20, then 30, then gone. Jones leaned over her shoulder, watching the screen pulse with green phantoms. "Which are real?" he asked. She hesitated. "You learn to know by how they move," she said. "The real ones breathe slower." That line stayed with him. Machines could lie, but motion betrayed truth. Unless, of course, one could teach the lie to move like truth. Later, back in London, he wrote in his notebook, "If reality can be mimicked in rhythm, the eye will believe the echo." That sentence would evolve into the blueprint for Operation Window, the illusion that would flood enemy screens with lifelike ghosts. But that night, he stood for a while outside the bunker, looking toward France. The horizon flashed faintly where bombs fell on another city. The air smelled of seaweed and smoke. Somewhere out there, the enemy's own screens were glowing in answer to his. It struck him that both sides were praying to the same God, the God of reflection. The language of shadows. Radar taught humanity a new kind of literacy, reading the unseen. For centuries, war had relied on eyes. Now it relied on echoes. The shift was spiritual as much as scientific. The sky had become a book of signals, and Jones was learning to read its margins. He often compared the process to listening to music in a language you don't yet understand. The melody moves you before the meaning arrives. Each pulse, each return, carried emotion as much as information. Fear, vigilance, pride. He could hear them all. When sleep finally came, it was filled with images of rotating beams and luminous dots that refused to fade. Even in dreams, he was decoding. You stand beside him at dawn. The airfield is empty except for a single tower humming in the wind. Above it, gulls trace slow circles in the pale light. Jones looks up and says quietly, "If you want to change the war, you must first change the way the enemy sees it." He smiles, tired but certain. Behind him, the radar dish turns, a mechanical sunrise sweeping through the mist. Somewhere, far beyond its reach, the next battle of perception is already beginning. Chapter 3: The Battle for the Airwaves. The war moves to a place without maps. No trenches to draw, no front line to hold, only a shifting weather of signals, rising and falling like tide. You listen for it the way sailors once listened for reefs, ear against the hull, breath held, waiting for a change in the water's voice. Inside a low, windowless room, the air is thick with heat from valves and transformers. The radar screen pulses. The listening set ticks softly. A pencil taps, pauses, writes numbers that look like rain. The men and women here have learned to count storms they cannot see. Tonight, the storm will answer back. R.V. Jones stands with his arms folded, head tilted, every muscle arranged for patience. He believes what the machine is saying, but he trusts it like a stranger. The trick is never to fall in love with your instrument. Machines are faithful until fear teaches them to lie. Noise, like a new weather. Jamming begins as a rumor on the headphones, a faint, furry hiss that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The operators lean closer, as if closeness could solve the signal. It grows, recedes, grows again. A tide dragging faint returns out to sea. Jones listens with his eyes closed. Noise, he thinks, is not the opposite of information. It is a shape you must learn to read. If you can shape noise, you can shape what the enemy believes. A small transmitter waits on the bench, its casing warm, its heart steady. The trial is simple. A murmur of interference, timed like a heartbeat, placed inside the narrow lane where the enemy's certainty travels. Too blunt, and the radar wink goes dark, and a blank screen is almost as informative as a bright one. Too delicate, and the blip walks through untouched. The art is to bruise the echo just enough that it tells a different story. They key the transmitter. A line of green breathes, then wavers. Not gone, not whole, a bird with a clipped wing. In the logbook, the operator writes one word: displacement. Across the channel, a German plotter rubs at his eyes. The blips he has chased for months suddenly move not like planes, but like thoughts, lagging, stuttering, arriving a breath too early and a breath too late, as if the sky were thinking of them and then changing its mind. The first phantom. The first true phantom appears by accident, which is how many revolutions introduce themselves. A formation is expected, 12, perhaps 15. The screen shows 30. A second station reports the same. Phones ring. Voices climb. Fighter controllers send men into night's mouth. But there are no 30 planes outside, only the world as it has been taught to look. Aluminum strips will come later, the deliberate flowering of confusion. For now the ghost is born of static side lobes and a gentle push in the enemy's ear. The German operators swear they see wings. What they see is their own faith, expertly lit. Jones watches reports flow in like a river split around a stone. He says little. His team marks timings with a calm that feels like prayer. The result is small measured victory. The interception curve bends into nowhere. Fuel burns. Men return angry and confused, their night's hunter fist closing on fog. You might wonder what courage looks like when the weapon is uncertainty. It looks like this, standing in a room without windows while strangers swear at the sky, knowing that the lie you taught the air may have kept another city from burning. Signatures and counter-signatures. The duel matures. What was crude becomes careful. Noise turns into handwriting. Jones teaches his people to think of the enemy's screen as a stage. Their job is lighting. A pulse here, a hush there, a gap just long enough to suggest turning. They practice reading the stylus trace like a physician reads an EKG, looking not for the signal, but for the health of the lie. Then comes the enemy's reply. Filters are tightened. Displays are narrowed to ignore the haze. A new confidence blossoms in German rooms. The sea of snow is cleaner. The blips are truer. For a week the night grows dangerous again. Jones does not argue with reality. He rotates the problem in his hands until it shows its seam. If the defenders prefer narrow, give them narrow abundance. Thin, bright points moving with the patience of real weight. If they prefer wide, give them weather. He sketches on a pad. Match their comfort. Inhabit it. Lead it away. Sometimes the countermeasure is as humble as a microphone against the roar of an engine, fed into the enemy's frequency like a rumor that grows teeth. Sometimes it is a wide shawl of quiet spread across a band until the listener is forced to unclench. Sometimes it is timing, always timing. Illusion is tempo. German room, 2 in the morning. You stand behind a young German lieutenant who has not tasted sleep in 2 days. His fingers tremble on the grease pencil. He has learned the personalities of his machines the way a shepherd learns his dogs. Tonight, one of them is anxious, overeager. Returns scatter like thrown salt. Multiple raids, someone says. Southwest. No, south. He traces, erases, traces again. A pilot's voice cuts in. Vector. The lieutenant gives him one, then another. The sky refuses them both, polite as a closed door. Hours later, the pilot lands with fuel like dust at the bottom of a jar. He does not know the names of the men who made his night so long. He knows only that something in the world no longer behaves. The ethics of fog, a first aside. You might wonder if the fog ever feels like guilt. Jones carries the question quietly, the way one carries a letter not yet opened. To deceive in order to spare. What do we call that, if not a moral paradox? Yet the arithmetic is cruel and clear. If 100 planes are not met by fighters because the fighters were sent to argue with ghosts, then 100 crews breathe into tomorrow, and 100 cities wake to windows unshattered. He writes in his notebook, small, neat letters that look almost tender. We do not force the enemy to see what is not there. We invite him to prefer it. The difference matters to him, even if no one else will ever read the line. The orchestra grows. By now the air war is an orchestra. Every instrument has learned where to wait and where to enter. Radar sets thrum, radio beacons mutter, listening posts murmur into phones, plotters' hands dance across maps. The music leaves no room for silence. But deception thrives in music as well as in quiet. Counterpoint disguises melody. To move unseen, learn harmony. Jones maps each German station not just by location, but by temperament. This one is cautious. This one overcorrects. This one believes the last report more than the next. In meetings, he speaks of them like characters in a book. His superiors nod, half amused, wholly convinced. It is easier to outwit a machine when you name the human perched in front of it. Trials multiply. Some nights, returning crews report fewer intercepts than expected. Some nights they report more, but at distances that make no sense, at heights where defenders never arrive. In the logs, a new phrase appears, set down in understated pencil: phantom pursuit. Across the sea, telegrams are terser, instruments unreliable, returns inconsistent, suspect enemy interference. A colonel writes in the margin, how? The question will sit there a long time, patient as dust. A lesson in movement. A young operator tells Jones, "You can fake a blip, sir, but it won't walk like a plane." He studies the trace, the subtle breathing of it. Real flight is a conversation between lift and gravity, engine and weather. The lie must converse, too. He assigns a mathematician to chart the sway of truth, the tiny drift when pilots correct, the slow bowing of a turn, the way formations breathe apart and together like a sleeping chest. From these studies a discipline emerges. The ghost that once stood still learns to meander. The smear becomes a path. The path develops a mind. On screens far away, controllers lift their chins. There, now we have you. But they do not. The night of two skies. There is a night, no different and forever different, when the map says there is one raid and the screens say there are three. The defenders split their force. One group races toward a swarm that is not there. Another climbs for height that never arrives. The third waits for an approach that has already slid 50 miles sideways. Bombs fall where planned. Not all. Never all. This is no magic, only physics tuned to doubt. But in the morning, the photographs show more roofs still whole than anyone predicted, and the crews who gather for tea are more tired than broken. In the ledger of this quiet war, the entry is written small and absolute. Time 1. Jones reads the reports without smiling. The work has no victory parade. He asks after the wounded, arranges a replacement cathode tube for a set that failed in the last hour, writes a note to a young woman whose timing on the quay saved half a squadron from pursuit. "Your ear," he writes, "is a shelter." He goes home in grey light. A milkman nods. Someone opens a shop door and sweeps the threshold as if the world were simple. He loves this hour most, when ordinary life insists on existing. The enemy adapts. Days later, the German filters tighten again. Operators are told to trust nothing without cross-check. Controllers change procedures. New instructions arrive in careful language that smells of laboratories. The duel sharpens. Jones reads a transcript and hears, beneath protocol, the soft admission that the other side has begun to understand the ground they stand upon is not ground at all but water. So he changes the current. Instead of one kind of distortion, he blends three. Instead of steady haze, he sends weather that comes in gusts. He teaches the ghost to sometimes tell the truth, because the most persuasive lie is one that takes your hand and lets you walk through a real room before it leads you down a false corridor. A quiet conclusion. The chapter ends not with triumph, but with a screen. You stand in the dark beside a woman who has worked 16 hours and will work 4 more. Her pencil floats above the glass like a small pendulum. She breathes in time with the sweep. A faint mark appears where none should be. She does not call it. She waits, listening with her eyes, remembering that truth returns in rhythm and panic arrives all at once. When it breathes again, she marks it, calm, exact, and the room moves like a hand closing around a cup. Outside, the sky is a well of ink. Somewhere inside that ink, men in aircraft trust the discipline of strangers they will never meet. R.V. Jones watches the process he has helped refine, doubt deployed like sailcloth, catching enemy wind and turning it to motion. He wants no credit and will accept none tonight. He is thinking of the next move, and the one after, and the day when ghosts will no longer be enough, when the lie must carry weight, shape, and glint like falling metal. For now, the air is full of carefully tended mistakes. On one shore, a headset hums with a storm that isn't. On the other, a screen blossoms with planes that will never land. The war has not ended. It has learned to whisper. Outside, the sea is black and patient. Waves arrive with the precision of clocks and the softness of sleep. The antenna turns. The pencil rests. The room exhales. And across 2 coasts, in languages that do not know each other, the same small word finds a place in 2 logbooks at once. Contact. Chapter 4. Operation Window. The idea arrives the way many revolutions do, as a scribble on an unremarkable scrap of paper. You imagine the room, rain ticking on the panes, a kettle sighing on a coil of wire, smoke rising in a line that refuses to bend. Jones is talking, half to himself, half to the silence. If radar sees reflections, then let us give it reflections. He draws a small rectangle, shades it lightly. Metal foil, he writes, tuned to the enemy's wavelength. It looks absurd, a handful of aluminum strips, nothing more. Yet within those few millimeters of metal hides a new dimension of war, a sky that can lie. The impossible trick. In principle, the notion is simple. Radar depends on echoes. Alter the echo and you alter belief. If one plane could scatter 1,000 tiny mirrors, each tuned to the right frequency, the enemy's screen would bloom with ghosts, entire squadrons of light where none existed. In practice, it sounds like madness. At the Air Ministry meeting, an older officer laughs softly. Tin foil? Are we to win the war with Christmas decorations? Jones only nods. Yes, if they fall at the right speed. He knows the arithmetic by heart. The German Würzburg radar transmits near 560 MHz. A strip half the wavelength long, roughly 13 inches, will shine on its screen like a mirror hung in the sky. Drop enough of them, spaced by wind, and the illusion will have rhythm, motion, mass. Someone mutters that it might also blind Britain's own radar, that the experiment could backfire. Someone else worries about moral confusion, about turning science into sleight of hand. Jones listens, expression unreadable. He thinks of the cities already burning, of the men climbing into bombers knowing how brief their odds are. He says quietly, if deception preserves the living, it is not dishonor. It is mercy made technical. The room falls silent. A colonel signs the authorization with a pen that seems heavier than ink. The code name is chosen with a small smile. Operation Window. A window through which light will never behave the same again. Cutting the sky. Factories begin cutting foil by the ton, thin ribbons of aluminum paper sandwich, trimmed to precise length, bundled in packets the size of hymn books. Each packet, when thrown from a bomber, will open like a sigh. At a test field in Yorkshire, the first bundles are released. They shimmer down through dusk, twisting, spinning, catching the dying light. On the radar screen inside the control van, the effect is instantaneous. A blossom of green fire that spreads, drifts, refuses to fade. The operator laughs out loud. It looks alive. Jones leans closer. The pattern breathes. The ghosts have lungs. He takes off his glasses and rubs his eyes. "Good," he says. "Now let's teach it to dance." For weeks they study the fall rate, the wind drift, the time it takes for each strip to descend through radar altitude. They learn to release packets in rhythm, a silent metronome of deceit. The air becomes choreography. In secret reports, Jones writes the phrase electronic ballet. He likes the contradiction, art made of arithmetic. The debate of conscience. By midsummer 1943, the invasion of Sicily looms, and the bombers bound for Hamburg wait on fogged airfields. Every commander knows the losses will be severe. The only untested hope is window. And still, fear clings to the order like static. What if the Germans copy it? What if the trick returns, multiplied? The Prime Minister himself hesitates. One scientist warns that to use window is to release a genie. Once the secret is seen, no radar will ever be trustworthy again. Jones replies with a calm that feels like exhaustion. They already know how to kill us in the open. Let us see if they can kill us in the dark. That night he writes a brief note to his wife, left unsent. If this works, it will be the first beautiful lie I've ever told. The night of falling light. On the evening of July 24, 1943, more than 700 Allied bombers lift from English runways toward Hamburg. Engines rumble like distant thunder rolling west to east. Each aircraft carries packets of window stacked beside the navigator's chair. At 20,000 feet, the first crew opens a hatch. The packets tumble out, burst, scatter. Ribbons whirl into the slipstream, thousands, then millions, twisting through moonlight like a silver storm. You can picture it, a slow snowfall of mirrors, each one catching the radar beam for an instant before drifting onward. To those inside the bombers, it looks almost peaceful, a shimmer that asks nothing, harms nothing. To those watching from the ground, it looks like the end of reason. In a bunker near Hanover, a German operator stares at his scope. The entire screen blooms. No pattern, no rhythm, just a dense garden of green sparks swelling until shape itself dissolves. He wipes the glass. "Multiple formations," he whispers. Another operator shakes his head. "It's everywhere. The whole sky's alive." Fighters launch blindly. Controllers shout bearings into static. The air fills with echoes chasing echoes. Above them, the real bombers move inside the storm they have made, unseen, untouched. In London, Jones listens to intercepted transmissions. His pencil stops halfway through a note. He hears disbelief turned into silence. He knows then that the trick has worked. The enemy's sight has become a mirror pointed inward. For hours he sits alone, radio humming softly beside him. Outside, rain falls straight down, innocent of physics. After the storm. Morning brings the smell of wet paper and metal. Reports flood in, losses fewer than anyone dared imagine. Photographs show smoke rising from the port, but not from the fields where cities once waited as targets. In German command rooms, Technicians sweep foil from runways with brooms, collecting handfuls of what looks like snow that will not melt. They study the fragments, measure, calculate, panic. By noon, orders go out to replicate it. By nightfall, every radar war in Europe has changed shape. Jones receives congratulations he cannot quite accept. He thanks his staff, writes polite replies, then walks out into the grey afternoon. Foil drifts in puddles where someone has emptied a test crate, thin, shining, anonymous. He picks up one strip, holds it between his fingers. It trembles in the wind like a note that will not end. He smiles, faintly. "So this," he murmurs, "is what truth looks like when it's folded." You might think the story ends here, in triumph, in ingenuity rewarded. But wars fought in shadows have long echoes. Once the world learns that sight itself can be fooled, nothing seen will ever again be entirely believed. Jones knows this. He feels it in the quiet between transmissions, in the way the air seems heavier after victory. The trick has saved thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, yet it has also loosened something fundamental, the belief that perception equals reality. And that is the beginning of another kind of war, the one fought inside the mind, between what is real and what is reflected. He turns off the light, leaves the lab, and steps into the drizzle. Each drop rings softly on the roof of his car, as if counting the seconds before illusion becomes doctrine, before deception becomes design. Far out at sea, the radar towers keep sweeping the horizon, their beams passing through the last scraps of foil still descending, still falling, still shining. Chapter 5. The Night the Sky Fell Twice. It begins as routine. A pale moon rises over northern Germany, weak behind haze. In the radar huts along the coast, coffee steams in enamel cups, and men settle into another long vigil of green light. The air smells of dust, solder, and sleep withheld. Outside, nothing moves, only wind through the reeds, the far rumble of waves. Then the screens bloom. 1,000 echoes appear where the sky had been clean. They roll forward in perfect symmetry, like tidewater invading a map. At first the operators think it must be a calibration fault. They check connections, slap gauges, tune knobs until the machines hiss like rain. But the rain does not stop. The first deluge. Karl Schneider is 23 and proud of his discipline. He believes in order, in instruments, in cause and effect. Tonight his scope pulses with chaos. Blips multiply faster than he can mark them. Every sweep of the antenna adds more. Clusters, spirals, whole constellations of motion. He calls for verification. Another station reports the same. Then another. Controllers trace the phantom swarms heading inland. Fighters scramble. Engines ignite across airfields that still smell of hay. Through the open bunker door, Karl hears the roar rising like a storm. He feels something inside him tighten, a small thread of certainty snapping. The sky of mirrors. Above the North Sea, the bombers glide within their silver storm. Strips of foil drift in moonlight, twisting slowly, endlessly. From each ribbon, radar waves scatter, bloom, return. The illusion thickens. You can almost see it from both sides at once. From below, the German night filled with ghosts, hundreds of planes overlapping, multiplying. From above, the bombers moving through their own reflection, invisible inside the brightness they've made. Inside one cockpit a navigator looks out at the glittering fall and whispers, "It's snowing light." He doesn't know that somewhere below, men are shouting into microphones, convinced that light itself has learned to lie. Voices in the static. Radio chatter turns frantic. 40 contacts. No, 60. Altitude uncertain. Vectors 055. Cancel, cancel. Too many returns. Fighters chase ghosts until fuel runs thin. Some collide in confusion. Some never find the enemy at all. One pilot later writes in his logbook, "The sky was full of airplanes that weren't there." Carl sits with his headset pressed tight, jaw aching. The display has become a living thing, breathing faster than he can follow. He remembers training lectures about noise, about side lobes and reflections. None of it matters now. What he sees is overwhelming, a universe without gravity. When the power flickers, the room gasps. For a heartbeat the screens go black, pure mercy. Then the generators hum back to life, and the storm returns, brighter. You watch him close his eyes. The glow paints his eyelids green. In that light, he dreams of silence. The observers. Far away in London, Jones listens to the intercepted fragments. The German controller's clipped voices break, merge, fade. He does not smile. Instead he leans forward, elbows on the desk, listening as if to a requiem he wrote by accident. He notes the time each confusion peaks, the interval between disbelief and recognition. On the chart before him, the line curves gently downward, the measure of comprehension unraveling. A colleague whispers, "They're blind." Jones shakes his head. No, they're seeing too much. The city below. Hamburg burns. From the air it looks like a hearth gone mad, red veins beneath black smoke. Yet even here, where real fire devours what illusion once protected, the echo of deception lingers. For the crews returning to England, the radar images of pursuit never appear. The hunters are lost in their own false heavens. On the ground, survivors speak later of two skies that night, one above, one below, both aflame. Hence the name whispered among pilots and engineers alike. The night the sky fell twice. The morning after. Dawn finds Carl still at his post. The storm of echoes has thinned to drizzle. The screens show a few shy returns, harmless as birds. He steps outside into air heavy with soot and dew. Foil litters the grass, thin ribbons clinging to fences, to boots, to the edges of puddles where the sunrise gathers. He picks one up. It is lighter than breath. He holds it between thumb and forefinger until the wind takes it again. It twists once, catching the light, and disappears. Back inside, his commanding officer dictates the report. Radar malfunction due to atmospheric anomalies. Recommend investigation. Carl writes it faithfully, though he knows the atmosphere that betrayed them tonight was not of nature's making. Echoes of reflection. In Britain, the news filters quietly through secure corridors. Losses minimal. Effect decisive. Jones reads the summaries, the praise couched in bureaucratic language. Countermeasures successful. He feels both pride and unease. He knows the war has crossed an invisible threshold. For centuries, armies built walls to hide from eyes. Now they build illusions to hide from minds. He writes a single sentence in his notebook before leaving for home. The moment the enemy trusts his instrument more than his senses, victory becomes arithmetic. A brief aside to the listener. You might wonder, as he does, whether truth can survive technology designed to mimic it. Perhaps it can, if someone still listens for the spaces between the notes, for the silence that no machine can counterfeit. Close your eyes and hear it, the sweep of a radar beam, the faint hum returning through air that has learned to echo itself. Each pulse says, "I see you." Each reply says, "You see what you wish to see." Between them lies the thin distance where humanity lives, too wise to believe, too afraid to doubt. The long reverberation. Weeks later, German engineers study the captured foil, calculating, experimenting, failing, learning. Within months they, too, will drop their own chaff into Allied skies. The illusion will become universal, the trick a dialect spoken by both sides. But on this first night, it is still singular, a secret symphony conducted by one quiet physicist across a continent of darkness. Jones sits alone in his office as the dawn creeps up behind blackout curtains. The kettle rattles once on the burner. He opens a folder, writes window, success confirmed. Then, almost as an afterthought, he adds a second note. Reality now negotiable. He closes the file. Outside, London begins to stir. The streets gleam with rain, and in every puddle the city doubles itself, reflected, inverted, beautiful, untrue. Chapter 6. The Ethics of Illusion. The war quiets for a moment. Or perhaps it only seems quiet because the echoes have stopped arriving. In London the sirens rest, the blackout curtains hang loosely, and for a few nights the air feels weightless. Window has worked, so perfectly that success itself hums like an aftershock. The city breathes, unsure whether to trust the pause. Inside a narrow office above Whitehall, R.V. Jones sits with the lights off, listening to his own machines. No signals tonight, only the soft crackle of valves cooling. It sounds like rain falling somewhere far away. The burden of silence. You might think victory would sound like applause, but it doesn't. It sounds like paperwork and quiet. Reports pile up, enemy confusion total, radar countermeasures effective, future use authorized. Each line is factual, bloodless, final. Jones reads them slowly. The words feel lighter than the lives they carry. He takes off his glasses, rubs the bridge of his nose. In the glass reflection, he looks older than his 30 years. The trick has aged him more than failure ever could, because every illusion, once born, becomes a question. Was the lie worth the truth it preserved? Letters never sent. On his desk lies an envelope addressed only with a first name, Eileen. He has written it a dozen times, never mailed it. Each draft begins the same. My dear, tonight the sky was full of things that weren't there, and because of that, men are still alive. He stops there, each time. How does one explain to someone outside the circle of secrecy that absence can be mercy, that falseness can be grace? He folds the half-page, sets it under the lamp, and goes back to equations. Reflections in glass. Across the Channel, the Germans have learned quickly. Their own foil falls now from their own aircraft. The trick has become a language spoken by both sides. Jones studies captured samples. The measurements are precise, the imitation almost flattering. He feels no anger, only inevitability. In war, knowledge is contagious. Still, something unsettles him. A technology created to protect has become an instrument of symmetry. In teaching the enemy blindness, he has also taught him sight. He looks out the window at the Thames, the surface catching glints of morning light. The river looks metallic, thousands of tiny mirrors moving together. He wonders if the water feels guilt for reflecting everything it touches. The argument with himself. A colleague congratulates him. "You've given us the edge. You should be proud." Jones answers softly, "Edges cut both ways." Later, walking home through fog, he turns the phrase over again. Edges cut both ways. Science, faith, deceit. Perhaps all progress is double-edged, one side shining with salvation, the other hidden in shadow. He remembers a boyhood fascination with magic tricks, the joy of revealing the mechanism, the sadness that followed once wonder was gone. War is the same performance on a larger stage, astonishment weaponized, innocence spent. He mutters, "We've turned knowledge into theater." The fog does not answer. An aside to the listener. You might wonder what becomes of conscience when it lives too long among circuits. Does it hum at the same frequency? Does it drift out of tune? Imagine sitting in a room of machines designed to deceive. Every signal you send might save a life. Every silence might cost one. Between those two outcomes lies only judgment, your own. Jones's judgment is careful, almost tender. He does not relish deceit. He uses it the way a surgeon uses anesthetic, to prevent greater pain. Still, even mercy leaves a scar. Echoes of philosophers. He spends nights rereading fragments of Spinoza, of Bacon, of scientists who believed understanding itself was virtue. He smiles at their innocence. In the margin of one essay he writes, "Truth is not the opposite of deception. It is its beginning." Because to deceive effectively, one must first know the truth precisely. To bend light, you must understand how straight it travels. He realizes then that science and illusion are siblings, not enemies, each searching for control over uncertainty. Dreams of light. Sleep brings no rest. He dreams of a sky made entirely of reflections, every star a strip of foil tumbling slowly through endless night. He dreams of operators on both sides staring at identical screens, each convinced of victory, each equally blind. He wakes with the taste of metal in his mouth. The consolation of purpose. Dawn again. He pours coffee gone cold and opens a new folder. Work continues. New countermeasures, new puzzles, new ghosts. He tells himself that purpose is absolution, that if he can stay one discovery ahead, maybe the moral noise will fade. But it never does. It lingers like background hiss, the frequency no filter can remove. He learns to live with it. He learns, even, to listen to it as if it were a conscience encoded in static. The river and the reflection. One evening he walks to the embankment. The air smells of coal and salt. Barges drift under the bridge, their wakes stretching into perfect ripples. In the water's skin he sees two Londons, one upright, one inverted, both real, both incomplete. He thinks of the operators he will never meet, the German young men with the same notebooks, the same fatigue. For them too, the world now comes as double image. He whispers, almost in prayer, "May we all learn which side of the reflection we stand on." Then he turns away, coat buttoned against the wind. The unanswered question. Back in his office, the machines hum again, new tests, new signals. He writes a single line on the blackboard, leaves it for his team to ponder. When truth and illusion protect the same lives, which one is righteous? No one erases it. For weeks the sentence remains, white chalk slowly fading to dust. It fades, but it never disappears. The war continues elsewhere, on seas, in fields, in codes. Here, in this quiet room of flickering screens, the battle has shifted from physics to philosophy. And yet, amid all his questions, Jones keeps working. Because sometimes doubt itself is a form of faith, the faith that somewhere, hidden in the interference, humanity might still be detectable. The beam sweeps. The room glows. Outside, dawn unfolds like paper. For a moment, the light on the horizon looks exactly like a return on the screen. Soft, steady, believable. He watches it fade and whispers, "Perhaps that's enough." Chapter 7. The Counter-Trick. The enemy learns quickly. They always do. What begins as wonder soon hardens into method, and the fog of illusion gives way to the geometry of revenge. Somewhere beyond the channel, engineers who once trusted their instruments now rebuild them to doubt less. The Germans call their new effort Gegenmaßnahme, countermeasure. It means the refusal to be fooled twice. The gathering of mirrors. At Peenemünde and Rechlin, small rooms bloom with chalk and smoke. Physicists stand over maps crossed with red lines and frequencies, whispering about window and how to see through it. One writes on the board, "Every deception leaves a shadow of truth." They decide to follow the shadows. New filters are designed to discard the slow-falling echoes of foil, to listen only for the firm heartbeat of real aircraft. Oscilloscopes flicker. Headphones crackle. They listen to their own disbelief until it becomes science. You can imagine the fatigue, men tracing graphs at midnight, coffee gone to sludge, the quiet fear that perhaps the machines have developed a will of their own. Outside the test bunkers, wind drags fragments of old foil across the fields. Even garbage glints like mockery. The duel reopens. In London, Jones receives the first reports. Enemy screens cleaner, interceptions more precise, losses rising again. He reads without surprise. He knew they would answer. Deception survives only while wonder lasts. He sketches on paper. A sine wave, then another, offset by a hair's breadth. Below it he writes, "Truth repeats itself. Lies must improvise." To improvise, he returns to fundamentals, the rhythm of echoes, the pulse of engines, the music of movement. If the Germans now filter by tempo, he will teach his ghosts to sing in tune. Tests begin in the coastal labs. They suspend strips of foil from balloons, set them swaying in the breeze, record the signatures. They find that foil cuts slightly longer, slightly twisted, breathes with a pulse closer to that of a moving plane. They call it shivering. On radar it looks almost alive. The counter-measure. The Germans reply with still tighter discrimination. Machines that measure the tiny Doppler shift of real flight, the difference between stillness and motion. Jones studies the captured manuals. He realizes the race is no longer about invention but interpretation. Their radar, he tells his staff, has become an eye that knows it can be fooled. We must become the lie that knows it will be seen. So he layers illusions, true echoes woven with false, packets of foil released in alternating rhythms. The new pattern fools not by hiding but by mimicking honesty. In war, sincerity itself becomes camouflage. When the next raid crosses the coast, German operators see both phantoms and planes. They cannot tell which is which, and indecision blooms like weather. The listener named Greta. In a bunker near Bremen sits a woman named Greta Bauer, mathematician turned radar specialist. She watches the green line sweep again, each time dividing reality from rumor. Her supervisor mutters about clever English tricks. She says nothing. She has begun to feel affection for the screen, its patience, its soft breathing. Tonight it feels almost sympathetic. The returns drift, tremble, fade, reappear. Each could be a bomber, or only the memory of one. Greta marks them all anyway. She has learned that the difference between existence and imagination can be measured but never proved. The conversation of ghosts. Jones receives fragments of enemy transmissions. Somewhere, a voice complains of echoes with intent. He smiles, a small, tired smile. To hear the other side describe your illusion as willful is the highest compliment. He writes in his notebook, "Perhaps the machines are talking to each other through us." For a moment he imagines the invisible dialogue, beams crossing above the sea, exchanging secrets the humans below will never decode. He likes the thought. It makes the war feel almost human. The storm of adaptation. By 1944, both sides are awash in counter-tricks. Chaff, jamming, false beacons, shadow raids. The sky itself becomes bilingual, fluent in deceit. Controllers speak in cautious tones. Analysts hedge every report. Even victory now arrives with a footnote, subject to verification. Jones keeps his calm. He tells his younger staff not to chase perfection. The point, he says, is not to be invisible forever. It is to make the enemy look long enough in the wrong direction. He could be describing war. He could be describing life. The brief return of sight. For one strange week in spring, the weather clears and the frequencies align. Both sides, by accident, see truly. Screens show single blips, honest and bright. No haze, no ghosts. Pilots on both sides report clear guidance, precise interception. Losses spike, then fall again when the next storm arrives. Jones notes it in his diary. Truth makes a brief appearance, confirms its own fragility. A small aside to the listener. You might ask why he continues, why a man so weary of illusion keeps building new ones. Because he has learned that in war, truth is not a possession, it is a moment. To reach it, one must pass through fields of necessary lies. And so he keeps tuning the dials, not for power, but for proportion, the delicate balance between deception and mercy. The mirror without end. By midsummer, the Germans unveil a final defense, the Naxos detector, tuned to catch the faint emissions of Allied radar. Now the hunters can find the hunted by the very beams meant to protect them. Jones reads the intercept report, closes it slowly. He feels a chill, not of defeat, but of recognition. The circle is complete. Every trick becomes a mirror, every mirror a trap. He tells a friend, "We are all reflections now." The friend laughs. Jones doesn't. The Whispering Sea. At the edge of the North Sea stands a forgotten station, one of the early towers of Chain Home, its wires corroded, its purpose obsolete. Jones visits at dusk. Wind rattles through the frame. Gulls cry like static. He runs his hand along a beam gone rough with rust. The air smells of salt and thyme. Somewhere far off, invisible signals still cross, as they always will, the endless duel of detection and disguise. He listens to the wind whistling through the broken metal and thinks it sounds like breathing. For a moment he feels peace. The machines may go on arguing forever, but for this heartbeat of evening, the frequency belongs to silence. Chapter 8. Turning the Tide. Before the invasion, the world must first learn to lie completely. It is 1944, and the Channel holds its breath. On every coast, men wait beside sealed orders. Ships sit motionless under camouflage nets. The sky itself seems to hesitate between weather reports. The real armies prepare in silence. The false ones prepare to be seen. And somewhere in that delicate balance between truth and performance stands R.V. Jones, part scientist, part conjurer, part weary witness to the invisible machinery of faith. The Great Concealment. The operation has 100 code names: Fortitude, Glimmer, Taxable, Quicksilver. Each is a trick nested within a larger trick, an architecture of illusion meant to guard one unspeakable secret, that the Allies will cross the Channel at Normandy, not Pas-de-Calais. Every deception depends on the same fragile principle. The enemy must choose to believe. Radar, once built to reveal, will now become the stage lighting for the grandest play ever performed. Across southern England, false convoys appear overnight, barges made of canvas, tanks sculpted from plywood, whole armies built of air and imagination. Above them, the sky hums with coded transmissions. Pilots fly in circles where maps demand straight lines. And in secret rooms, operators tune their radar sets to create echoes where there are none. You stand among them, the quiet engineers of unreality. The air smells of wet grass and oil. Someone counts the minutes between sweeps. Someone else scribbles altitudes that never existed. The work feels like rehearsal for a play whose audience holds rifles. The Ghost Fleets. In late May, small squadrons of aircraft take off from the southern coast carrying bundles of chaff, window, reborn as theatre. Their mission: to build phantom fleets on enemy radar, to paint entire invasions in the wrong direction. At midnight on June 5th, as the sea darkens under low cloud, the first packets fall. Thin silver ribbons unfurl into the wind, drifting like slow rain. They create shapes, long, symmetrical, deliberate, the outline of a convoy sailing toward Calais. German operators wake to screens alive with movement. Echoes advance in neat lines, too regular to dismiss. Fighters scramble, coastal guns swivel, reports rush toward Berlin like water down a drain. To them, the invasion has begun. They do not know that the ships they see are made of silence and foil, drifting nowhere. The Shadow Army. Jones reads the first intercepts at dawn. Everything unfolds exactly as designed. The false fleets draw defenses northward. The real armada passes unseen beneath storm clouds further west. He allows himself one deep breath, no more. Victory in this kind of war is measured not in explosions, but in absence. The targets never bombed, the soldiers never ambushed, the lives unlost. He listens to the hum of a distant generator and thinks how strange it is that so much depends on air vibrating at the right frequency. Later that day, as the invasion begins, he walks to a nearby field. Clouds hang low. The wind tastes of salt. Above, aircraft move in slow procession, vanishing into grey. He cannot see the beaches, cannot see the men below, but he knows that somewhere, amid all the chaos of truth, the quiet architecture of deceit is holding strong. The Other Side. In a bunker near Boulogne, Greta Bauer sits once again before her screen. For hours the pattern of returns has been perfect, almost too perfect. Now she notices something odd. The echoes seem to pause, as if waiting for her to look away. Then they resume, steady, obedient. She frowns, checks calibrations. Everything normal. And yet a feeling lingers, that the night itself has learned to play along. Her superior enters, breathless. They've landed. Calais, or near it. Greta looks back at the screen. The echoes have shifted slightly east, continuing their march. She nods without speaking. Only later will they learn the truth, that the real landings came from the fog, that while they watched these patient ghosts, history walked in from another direction. The cost of clarity. For Jones, the success feels both immense and unbearable. He knows what the newspapers will never print. That deception now outperforms courage, that illusion has become the surest defense. The age of the battlefield has turned into the age of belief. That night he cannot sleep. He lies awake listening to the hum of distant bombers returning home, the faint metallic whisper of foil falling into the sea. He whispers into the dark. The truth no longer needs to exist, only to be imitated better than the lie. He regrets the thought even as he forms it. An aside to the listener. You might feel it too, the unease that follows every clever invention. What happens when protection becomes performance, when survival depends on how well we deceive? Perhaps every era faces this in its own language. Ours speaks in signals. Close your eyes and imagine those screens, thousands of points of light crossing the glass, each one a heartbeat of belief. Which of them are real? Which are ghosts? Does it matter if both save lives? The Quiet Tide. By dawn of June 6th, the Channel churns with ships that no one saw coming. The first waves reach Normandy's sand. The world tilts toward liberation. In the control huts, British radar operators stare at their own screens, still clear, still calm, untouched by the chaos they have helped unleash. They mark coordinates, sip cold tea, and say nothing. When the confirmation arrives, landing successful, someone claps once, softly, then lowers his hand. Outside, gulls circle the cliffs. The sea keeps its secrets. The letter sent. That evening Jones writes again to Eileen. This time he finishes the letter. My dear, the invasion has begun. I watched the sky today and thought how strange it is that truth and illusion can march in step. Perhaps history itself is only a kind of echo, the sound of what might have been, returning. He signs it simply R. He seals the envelope, places it by the window. Outside, the air smells of lilac and rain. For the first time in years, the war feels finite, not over, but finite. The echo that remains. In the following weeks, reports confirm what the radar screens first whispered. The deception worked perfectly. German reinforcements stayed north for critical days, chasing shadows on glass. By the time they saw clearly, the tide had already turned. Jones stands at the coast one evening, wind tugging at his coat. Waves crash in patient rhythm. He imagines each crest as a pulse of radio energy, crossing, returning, fading. He smiles. Even the sea understands radar now. Then the smile fades. He wonders how long the world can live on reflections before forgetting the original light. The invasion has succeeded. But for the man who made the sky lie, victory carries the taste of silence, the silence that follows when illusion becomes fact, when the map replaces the territory, when every echo returns home. He turns from the shore. The wind carries a whisper through the dunes, soft, repetitive, uncertain, as if the world itself is asking whether it, too, has been deceived. Chapter 9. The Sound of Empty Skies. The war ends quietly, as all vast storms do, first in rumor, then in air. Guns fall silent before minds believe they have. Across Europe, the towers still turn, the screens still glow, reluctant to forget the language of vigilance. And when at last the orders arrive, stand down, it feels like blasphemy against the machines that have learned to dream in echoes. The last sweep. On a damp morning in 1945, Jones stands inside a radar hut near the Suffolk coast. The room smells of rust and dusted paper. The set before him hums faintly, green lines sweeping through nothing. No blips, no movement, only the faint snow of the atmosphere itself. He waits for contact out of habit, not hope. For 6 years the world has answered him with ghosts. Now even ghosts are gone. He switches off the transmitter. The silence that follows feels immense, a cathedral of absence. Outside, the sea rolls indifferent and forgiving. A gull drifts across the horizon, untracked, unmeasured, perfectly real. The return to light. London wakes slowly from its blackout, each bulb a small rebellion. The river mirrors the city like an apology. People walk with cautious wonder, blinking as if sight itself were fragile. Jones moves among them unnoticed, one more tired man in a worn coat. Only he sees the invisible infrastructure still humming above them, the ghosts of beams, the forgotten frequencies looping through the air like faint afterthoughts of war. He thinks, the world will never be unlistened again. Transformation. In the years that follow, radar sheds its camouflage of secrecy. Towers once built for warning begin watching weather instead. Airports bloom across continents, their dishes turning slowly like mechanical flowers. Ships cross oceans guided by the same reflections that once guided fear. Jones advises on the new civilian systems, patient as ever, explaining to fresh engineers how to read the language he helped invent. He smiles when they call it peaceful work. Inside, he knows peace is only another kind of vigilance. The memory of mirrors. Occasionally, he is asked to lecture about Window and the age of deception. Students take notes, historians applaud. He always ends with the same thought. Technology is never moral by itself. It inherits the conscience of those who tune it. Afterward, he walks home along the embankment. Lights shimmer on the Thames. In their ripples, he sees both victory and repentance. Each reflection breaks and mends with every passing wave. He pauses by the railing, murmurs to no one, "Perhaps we fooled the sky to learn humility." An aside to the listener. You can stand beside him if you wish. Feel the cool rail under your palms, the hum of the city now unthreatened. Listen long enough, and beneath the traffic you'll still hear it, the low electrical heartbeat of a world that learned to see through air. It is the same hum that guided pilots through storms, that watched coastlines through fog, that whispered, "Here you are." Even now, decades later, the planet pulses with those quiet affirmations. If you listen carefully, you might sense how small they are, how kind. The last letter. One spring afternoon he writes a final letter, not to Eileen but to himself. We have taught the world to see by listening. The danger now is that we may stop hearing altogether. May we remember that every signal once began as silence. He folds the page, leaves it in his desk, and never sends it. The paper yellows gently, untouched, like a fossil of thought. The field of echoes. Years later, on a coastal road, the remnants of chain homes still stand, towers skeletal against a pale sky. Jones visits one last time. Wind moves through the hollow girders, producing a faint whistle that sounds eerily familiar. He closes his eyes. For a heartbeat, it could be radar again, sweeping the horizon for dangers that no longer exist. He smiles. "Still listening," he says. The sound of empty skies. At dusk, the light turns copper over the water. The horizon looks clean, undecided, infinite. The only sound is the wind moving through the grass, the same frequency as breath. He knows that somewhere above, satellites, descendants of his own machines, circle the planet, sending back pictures of clouds and continents. They are the grandchildren of deception, now dedicated to weather and peace. He finds comfort in that symmetry. He sits on the grass until the stars appear, steady, faithful, unjammable. Each one an ancient signal crossing the void, truth traveling at the speed of patience. And for the first time in years, R.V. Jones does not listen for war. He listens for nothing. He listens for the sound of empty skies. Aftermath, reflections that never fade. The world moves on as it always does, not with applause, but with the quiet efficiency of forgetting. Wars end the way tides end, withdrawing inch by inch until only salt and silence remain. You stand on a coastline that could be anywhere. The air is clear, the horizon unbroken. And yet, if you close your eyes, you can still hear it, the faint rhythmic hum that once connected every heartbeat to the sky. Radar has become ordinary now, invisible in its usefulness, guiding planes through fog, measuring storms, tracing the slow breath of the planet itself. The same frequencies that once deceived now protect. And perhaps that is what redemption looks like, technology turned toward tenderness. Once, a young engineer taught the sky to lie. He built a curtain of mirrors and called it mercy. He fooled an empire with math and kindness intertwined. He never asked for glory, only understanding, that strange, gentle kind that arrives too late to matter. In later years, he would walk beneath clear skies and wonder if the air still remembered the noise of war. Maybe it does. Maybe every wave that leaves a transmitter carries, hidden inside it, the echo of a man choosing conscience over certainty. Because what Jones created was more than a weapon. It was a lesson in human paradox. He proved that truth could be preserved through deception, that compassion could travel disguised as cunning. And in doing so, he revealed something quietly divine, that morality, like radar, depends on reflection. You might think of him now, standing by the rusted towers, coat collar up against the wind, the same wind that once carried his illusions across Europe. He touches the metal, hears it whisper, and feels no guilt. The air forgives faster than men do. Behind him, the sea folds over itself again and again, like film rewinding, every wave a replay, every foam line a caption. What once was terror has become texture. What once was secrecy has become sound. If you look up tonight, you'll see stars, patient, indifferent, burning as they always have. Each one is a pulse of energy crossing an impossible distance, a signal from a past that refuses to die. They are the universe's original radar, returning messages from the beginning of time. And maybe that's the real meaning of reflection, not light bouncing back, but memory refusing to leave. In a way, we are all echoes of something, of choices made, of silences kept, of kindness disguised as cleverness. The world we inherit is built not just on invention, but on restraint, on the quiet decision to use intelligence not for dominance, but for mercy. So, before the signal fades, listen once more to the hum beneath the quiet. It's there, low, constant, ancient. The sound of machines learning to serve rather than to hunt. The sound of skies that no longer need to choose between truth and illusion. It is the sound of peace pretending, beautifully, to be ordinary. And if you've drifted this far with us, through darkness and static, through invention and remorse, then perhaps you've already understood what he meant when he said, "To deceive in order to protect is to see the world as it truly is, fragile, brilliant, and worth the trick. Now, let the noise settle. Let the lights dim. The last echo fades, leaving only the pulse of the earth, steady, merciful, alive. Echoes beyond victory. The silence that learned to speak. It begins where the noise ended. The air is still, but it hums differently now, not with fear, but with memory. You stand on a cliff above the North Sea. The towers that once whispered war now only listen to weather. Wind threads through their skeleton frames, producing a sound like breath through glass. It is the same song, slower now, older. The kind of silence that remembers what it used to be. R.V. Jones stands beside one of them, a thin figure in a thick coat, eyes following the horizon. He's older, but the stance is the same. Patient, curious, alert to the unseen. The war that once defined his life has dissolved into textbooks and archives. Yet the air still carries his invention. Radar beams crossing continents, invisible, ceaseless, polite. He once taught the sky to lie. Now he's teaching it to tell the truth again. It's 1952. Britain has traded blackout curtains for television screens, secrecy for bureaucracy, and yet the feeling persists. That need to watch the horizon, to measure what's coming, to prepare for something that never fully arrives. In Whitehall, committees form around words like defense and warning and early detection. The ghosts of the last war are now blueprints for the next. And somewhere in the new labyrinth of acronyms, Rota, AI, DW line, Jones's signature still lingers on the circuits. The child of window and deception has grown into something vaster. A network of vigilance stretched from Iceland to Alaska, from the chalk cliffs of Kent to the snows of Greenland, an electronic horizon that circles the planet like conscience itself. He had wanted peace. What he built instead was perception. Inside an Air Ministry basement, a new generation of engineers tune screens that glow a colder shade of green. No bombers now. Only test flights, weather, echoes of ships crossing invisible lines. But each blip still carries weight. Each return still stirs the same question. Is it real? A young radar officer, not yet born when the war began, glances up at the aging physicist and asks, "Sir, do you ever miss it, the urgency of those days?" Jones shakes his head. "No," he says quietly. "But I do miss the clarity." The boy laughs politely, not understanding. How could he? He's growing up in a world where vigilance has no enemy, only possibilities. You move through the corridors with him, through rooms where new machines pulse softly, where vacuum tubes have given way to transistors, and the rhythm of protection sounds almost like progress. He runs a hand along a console humming with power. "Listen," he says. "You do." The tone is constant, serene, like a prayer written in electricity. It's beautiful and faintly terrifying, because somewhere within that hum lies the legacy of a single decision: to make the invisible visible, to trust the echo more than the eye. That decision has outlived its war. It has become architecture, philosophy, a way of existing. Outside, the sea glints with peacetime industry. Ships cross channels not in fear, but in schedule. Airliners climb through clouds tracked by the same mathematics that once guided bombers. The world has inherited his trick, and no one even calls it a trick anymore. They call it progress. Jones watches a jet leave a white scar across the blue sky. He notes its trajectory instinctively, still half an analyst at heart. He smiles. "So clean now," he murmurs. "So visible." But visibility, he knows, is its own kind of illusion. The more we see, the less we believe. The clearer the signal, the quieter the meaning. He thinks of the old days, of radio static and dim screens, of guessing and grace. Then he looks at this new, sterile precision and wonders whether uncertainty might have been the last true form of faith. The wind rises. A gull arcs above the tower and disappears into sun. Jones pulls his coat closer, feeling the years between wars like static between frequencies. He has no illusions left, but he has something better, perspective. And as the sky hums softly with his own invention, he whispers to no one, perhaps this is what peace sounds like, a silence that learned to speak. Chapter 1. The Horizon That Watches Back. The war was over, but the machines refused to rest. They had grown accustomed to listening, and the sky, once interrogated, would never again be silent. You can hear it still, that faint pulse across the spectrum, a heartbeat woven into modern air. To the untrained ear it's only hum, but to our V. Jones it is habit, the world making sure it still exists. Return to service. London smells of dust, coal, and cautious optimism. The old Air Ministry has been reborn under new names and committees, yet the same corridors echo with the same clipped footsteps. Jones walks them again, summoned not by secrecy now, but by necessity. Britain needs minds that understand uncertainty. He carries no weapon, only a folder marked scientific intelligence. Inside are sketches of post-German technology, new radar frequencies, captured prototypes, rumors of Soviet experiments with jamming and reflection. The war's language of deception has become a dialect of deterrence. At his first meeting, a general asks, "Professor Jones, do you still believe the enemy can be fooled?" Jones smiles faintly. "I believe the enemy is now everyone's imagination." The room laughs uneasily, unsure whether it's a joke. The rotor age. Britain begins to wire itself again, this time against an invisible future. The rotor network rises across the countryside, hardened bunkers, circular domes, new dishes spinning beneath reinforced earth. The design is practical, almost humble, built not for glory, but for duration. From above, the coastline glitters with antennas like steel flowers opening toward the horizon. Jones visits several sites, notebook in hand, measuring signal lag, checking calibration, listening to the low animal growl of generators underground. He notices how the engineers talk about the sky, not as space, but as territory. Coverage to 200 miles. Blind sector at 30 degrees. Language turning distance into defense. One evening he stands at the top of a new station in Kent, wind roaring through the latticework. He writes a single sentence in his field book. The horizon is no longer where the earth ends, but where attention does. Ghosts in peacetime. The first false alarms arrive that winter. Migrating geese, thunderstorms, even the moon rising through coastal fog, all mistaken for intruders. Each misreading triggers a chain of checks, phones ringing through the night. The nation learns again how fear travels at the speed of light. Jones observes quietly. He doesn't scold the operators. He knows they're fighting their own imagination. Every echo, he tells them, is innocent until proven hostile. He spends evenings tuning the receivers himself, trying to teach machines humility, the ability to ignore what isn't real. Across the sea. In Washington, American scientists mirror his work. New towers climb along northern Canada, the distant early warning line, stretching across tundra like a necklace of vigilance. Steel domes glisten under aurora light, connected by thin lifelines of cable and radio. Jones receives photographs of these sites, men in parkas beside glowing consoles, snow illuminated by green radar light. He studies them with fascination and unease. The same invention that once saved Britain now guards the entire hemisphere. It feels less like progress than escalation disguised as patience. An aside to the listener. You might wonder what it feels like to live inside an age that never blinks. Imagine knowing that the sky itself is awake, every second, watching for shapes that might never come. Peace begins to resemble insomnia. The world sleeps with one eye open. And yet, within that vigilance lies comfort, the illusion that awareness equals safety, that light can keep away what darkness might invent. Jones understands the illusion better than anyone. He built it, and still he stands beneath it, listening, hoping the hum will never stop. The new silence. By 1950, the radar maps of Europe glow like constellations. Each green dot marks a transmitter, a listener, a promise. To an artist they might look beautiful. To Jones they look inevitable. He visits one site at night, alone. Snow drifts against the door. The room inside glows softly, machines whispering to themselves. He switches off the overhead light and lets the consoles paint him in phosphorescent green. The silence feels alive, attentive. For a long while he simply stands there, neither triumphant nor afraid, only thoughtful. He has seen what happens when the world stops listening. He would rather it never sleeps again. The hum deepens, steady and tender. Outside, the horizon watches back. Chapter 2. The Line of Listening. The world has redrawn its map of fear, not by borders or treaties, but by signals. From the pole to the equator, the air hums with watchfulness, lines of radio, radar, and reason stitching the horizon into a seamless net. It isn't empire anymore. It's attention. The cold frontier. The first stations rise from snow. Plywood walls, diesel heaters, wires trembling in polar wind. Men with frost-stiff beards tune oscillators inside tin shelters, their breath clouding the air. Above them, auroras shimmer like spilled frequency bands, nature broadcasting on every channel. They call it the distant early warning line, a chain of listening posts stretching across Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Iceland. Thousands of miles of silence broken only by static and the slow ticking of transmitters. Each one manned by a handful of operators who measure time in blips. You can almost hear it, a faint, rhythmic tone carried through the snow, like a heartbeat echoing through frozen ground. R.V. Jones studies the first reports from afar, sitting in his London office surrounded by maps of magnetic fields. He knows what it means. It's the same logic he once applied to Europe's skies. Only now the horizon has no end. He writes in his diary, "The world is learning to listen to itself." North of silence. At one Arctic station, a young operator named Frank Davies marks the time every 6 seconds. He has never seen combat, only weather. Outside, wind carves the snow into glass. Inside, the console glows a gentle green that feels almost human. Sometimes he talks to the machine, as if it might answer. He taps the metal edge and says, "Still awake, old boy?" The screen replies with its steady sweep, loyal and wordless. Jones visits him one winter, a brief inspection tour, unannounced. He steps out of a small transport plane, wrapped in wool and ore. The horizon looks infinite, the color of tin and forgetting. "Why here?" he asks the station chief. "Because nothing else is," the man answers. Later, inside the control room, Jones listens to the radar's hum blending with the wind. It sounds like the war, only calmer. He looks at the young men, faces raw from cold, eyes tired from monotony, and realizes they are guardians of something intangible, the absence of surprise. The American mirror. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. Air Force builds its own horizon. Massive radar domes swell across mountaintops, white geodesic spheres that look almost gentle, like clouds anchored to the earth. They name it SAGE, a computer brain linking every radar pulse into a single map of North America. Inside its rooms, vacuum tubes glow like constellations. Operators move small plastic markers across digital maps that never sleep. Jones watches from Britain, half impressed, half wary. He sees the same impulse that drove him, but scaled to a level that frightens him. He calls it the architecture of anxiety. Once, deception had been a scalpel, a small, precise trick to confuse an enemy. Now it has become a mirror the entire world must stare into, just to reassure itself it's still there. The whisper of progress. By 1955, radar is no longer military technology. It guides planes, ships, storms, even birds. The word detection has lost its menace. The same wave that once found bombers now measures rainfall. Jones gives a lecture at Cambridge titled Peaceful Uses of Reflection. Students take notes, unaware that their professor once weaponized illusion. He smiles as he speaks, proud yet cautious. He warns them gently. When you see everything, you risk seeing nothing clearly. That night he walks home under drizzle. Streetlights flickering like small beacons in fog. Each halo reminds him of radar, light returning to its source, seeking permission to exist. He stops on Westminster Bridge and watches the Thames shimmer. Ripples spread under the glow of a passing bus. In each wave he sees the same truth. Every signal needs something to come back from. Aside to the listener. You might think of radar as mathematics, but to Jones, and perhaps to you standing here now, it's closer to faith. It requires belief in what you cannot touch, trust in a return you might never see. Perhaps that's why he feels oddly calm in this new era of suspicion. Where others hear threat, he hears continuity. He knows the hum in the air isn't fear. It's attention, remembering what silence cost. The world, in its guarded way, is trying to stay alive. And for now, that's enough. The map that breathes. By decade's end, the entire northern hemisphere glows in radiolight. Arctic snowfields, Scottish moors, American plains, all dotted with towers, all humming in quiet coordination. From orbit, if you could see it, the planet would look like a breathing lung of electricity. Exhale, signal sent. Inhale, echo received. Jones traces the pattern with a pencil across a map, then closes the notebook gently. The world has become his experiment, and though he never meant it, he realizes that perhaps it needed to be. He looks out the window, where a thin line of dawn divides night from day, and in that faint line, the horizon is listening. Chapter 3. Operation Eye Shield. The name sounded harmless enough. Not sword, not thunder, not retaliation, just Eye Shield. as if the act of looking could somehow protect you. The Pact of Mirrors. By 1957, the English Channel was no longer a border. It was a wavelength. Signals bounced from Dover to Dieppe, from Norfolk to Norway, forming a quiet alliance of vigilance. R.V. Jones watched the cables cross oceans and politics alike. Britain's rotor system had merged into America's SAGE, and soon their radar stations would speak a shared language. Binary, magnetic, unblinking. He had once taught nations to deceive. Now he taught them to share. But sharing, in this new age, meant surrendering secrets to machines. Each station was a small conscience humming in the fog. Each antenna a promise. If we can see it first, maybe it won't happen at all. And so began Operation Eye Shield, an Anglo-American experiment to simulate invasion patterns, without firing a shot. Decoys, false targets, controlled reflections, not to mislead the enemy, but to test themselves. Illusion as insurance. The radar maze. Somewhere off the coast of Scotland, a fleet of bombers flies ghost missions through invisible corridors, their real path disguised by clouds of metallic echo. Below, radar operators in Cornwall watch a sky full of phantoms, friendly illusions sent to test the reliability of truth. R.V. Jones observes from a dim control room, headphones pressed to one ear, pencil poised. He listens not for sound, but for failure, that moment when belief and data drift apart. The lines of green light dance across screens like veins pulsing in a vast, mechanical heart. He remembers the war, how radar once meant life or death, and how simple the choice seemed then. Now it feels different. Every false signal is both protection and provocation. Each test proves how fragile peace has become. He writes in his notes, "We deceive ourselves now, to make sure we cannot be deceived by others." The invisible border. The Cold War frontier is not a wall, but a waveform, a shimmer over the Arctic, a whisper between frequencies. British radar pings the edge of Soviet airspace. Soviet radar pings back. A duet of mistrust played at the speed of light. Sometimes they overlap, creating ripples, ghost contacts that appear on both sides. Each side believes the other has made the first move. Each side prepares to respond. Jones watches the reports come in, calculating error margins, advising calm. He sees how easily war can return, not through intention, but through reflection. He thinks of the old deception missions, cardboard tanks, wooden airfields, brilliant in their simplicity. Now the battlefield is made of electricity, and no one can tell where it ends. The weight of knowing. At a late-night briefing in London, a younger officer turns to Jones and says, "It must feel good to know you've built the shield that keeps us safe." Jones looks at him, then at the glowing maps covering the wall. Thin arcs of green light drift across Europe, gentle as eyelids closing. "I'm not sure it's safety," he says quietly. "Perhaps only delay." He doesn't say the rest aloud. That every delay is bought with a deeper fear. That every signal sent into the sky asks the same question. Are we ready to believe what we might see? Aside to the listener. You might imagine the Cold War as stillness, but it was never silent. The air itself was full, not of music, but of maintenance. Signals looping endlessly, Machines listening to themselves in the dark. Imagine standing beneath that invisible storm, hearing nothing, but knowing that the sky is crowded with attention. That's what peace felt like, an orchestra of watchfulness, each note a warning disguised as comfort. The night of false dawn. One morning in 1960, a radar station in Greenland reports incoming objects, hundreds of them, moving fast. The screen glows frantic with light. Alarms rise through command centers. Phones ring. For 3 minutes, the world holds its breath. Jones, called from sleep, rushes to verify the data. He studies the frequencies, the echo consistency, the strange symmetry of the contacts. He exhales slowly. "It's the moonrise," he says. "Only the moon." Later, when comm returns, he walks outside and watches that same moon hanging over the frozen horizon. Quiet, innocent, blameless. He almost laughs. The same sky that once hid danger now mimics it perfectly. He whispers, "The machines are learning imagination." Epilogue to the chapter. In his office that night, Jones writes one more note. If radar taught us to see, perhaps it must also teach us when not to. He closes the notebook, switches off the lamp, and lets the dark reclaim the room. Outside, the world hums, steady, endless, faithful. The eyes are open. The shield holds. For now. Chapter 4. Reflections of the Atom. The hum deepened. It was no longer a question of who might come, but what might arrive. Radar, once the eye that saved nations, was now the heartbeat of the bomb. The nervous system of deterrence. It began, as all new fears do, with precision. Missiles replaced bombers, and speed made distance meaningless. The sky could no longer be watched by men in towers. It needed nerves, reflexes, instant decisions. And so the machines took over. Circuits connected to circuits. Loops of data without rest or doubt. They called it automated defense. But Jones knew what it truly was. Mechanized fear. From his advisory chair at Whitehall, he watched radar evolve into something colder, faster, more absolute. Lines that once traced aircraft now traced the fate of humanity. He had always trusted reflection, the quiet conversation between signal and silence. Now the conversation could end the world. The age of equations. In the 1960s, the vocabulary of safety changed. No longer enemy or ally, but yield, trajectory, probability. Mathematicians replaced generals. Fear became geometry. Jones, now older, walks into a NATO laboratory filled with humming consoles. Young scientists speak in numbers. Radius of blast, seconds to impact, response latency. On the central display, a model of the planet covered in moving circles. Warning zones, radar ranges, early warning arcs. It looks like art. It looks like madness. He traces one glowing arc with his finger. It represents 2 minutes. 2 minutes to see, to think, to believe. He smiles faintly. Even God, he murmurs, took longer than that to decide. No one laughs. The men who wait. In an underground command center outside London, operators sit before screens that never sleep. No sunlight, No seasons, only signal. They live in 12-hour shifts of vigilance, listening to the world breathe through static. Jones visits them one night. He brings tea, out of habit, and stays to listen. "What's it like?" he asks one young lieutenant. The man shrugs. "Like holding your breath for a living." Jones nods. He understands too well. During the war, every blip on a screen meant danger. Now, every blip means everything. The line between watching and waiting has vanished. When he leaves, he writes in his notebook, "We have replaced battle with rehearsal." The mirror in the sky. That same year, the first radar satellites appear. Steel mirrors orbit above the Earth, watching all that moves, reporting every flicker of light or motion. Jones sees the photographs, the planet veiled in cloud, the faint glint of ocean waves mistaken for fleets. The same principle, just turned upward. For him it feels like inevitability. He tells a journalist once, "Every invention wants to know what else it can see." The journalist quotes him out of context, and the line becomes famous. It follows him for the rest of his life. He doesn't regret saying it, only that people mistook it for pride. Aside to the listener. You might imagine the atomic age as silence, but silence is not absence. It's the sound of holding still, a planet listening to itself breathe through wires. In this era, fear is no longer loud. It hums beneath everything. Radios, televisions, heartbeats. A tone you stop hearing only when it stops existing. Jones understood that hum. He'd lived inside it for decades, and sometimes, late at night, when the static on his radio turned into faint Morse-like whispers, he would close his eyes and pretend it was still 1940, that the signals meant hope again. The test. In 1963, Britain conducts an underground nuclear test. Jones is invited to observe. He hesitates, then goes. He watches from a reinforced viewing room as instruments tremble. No explosion is seen, only measured. When it's over, a technician announces the success. Jones remains silent, staring at the oscillographer's gentle pulse, returning to calm. The same kind of wave he once used to find planes, now used to measure destruction. He writes one line in the margin of his report: "We have taught reflection to fear itself." The night of the long pulse. Weeks later, he stands on a coastal bluff in Scotland, looking toward the North Sea. The radar towers are gone now, replaced by slender white domes. Inside them, the future hums patiently. The air smells of rain and static. He thinks of his students, his machines, his long career of listening. He feels both proud and weary, a man whose invention outgrew his intent. He wonders, if radar could dream, what would it dream of? Perhaps calm seas, perhaps no echoes at all. The wind carries the sound of distant surf. The domes gleam like moons half buried in earth. For a moment, they seem to breathe with him, steady, unafraid, as if the sky itself were whispering back. Chapter 5. The Listening Earth. The world has grown ears. They hang from satellites, nest in valleys, spin above deserts and seas. They do not judge, only notice. and for the first time in history, the planet is aware of its own shape. The second invention. By the late 1960s, the word radar has become too small. The air now holds new names: sonar, LiDAR, side-scan, satellite array. Each one a variant of the same idea. Send a pulse, wait for the world to answer. Jones watches from the sidelines now, semi-retired, a quiet advisor. He sees his old trick reborn as cartography. Ships trace the ocean floor with echoes. Astronauts map the moon with microwaves. Airliners glide across continents guided by beams he once tuned by hand. It is no longer deception. It is revelation. He calls it the listening Earth, a phrase that appears in one of his final lectures. Half poetic, half prophetic. The students don't write it down. They'll understand it decades later, when satellites begin to show the planet breathing. The sound of rain. In a Cambridge laboratory, he watches radar capture a storm. The display blossoms with shifting patterns of light. Rainfall rendered as movement. Clouds drawn like thought. An engineer beside him explains how each color represents intensity. Jones smiles. "It's painting," he says softly. The engineer laughs. "No, sir, it's data." But he's right, of course. It is painting. A world sketching itself in frequencies. Every droplet a note in a symphony of return. He stands silently for a long while, listening to the machine translate thunder into truth. It feels like forgiveness. Eyes in orbit. The first weather satellites drift above the equator, their cameras capturing the slow pulse of continents. Clouds curl like breath. Storms spiral like living thought. To most, these images are mere science. To Jones, they are revelation. The Earth, for the first time, seeing itself whole. He imagines how it must look from up there. A pale blue signal, delicate, uncertain, radiant. In his notebook he writes, "When we taught the sky to see, we gave the earth a mirror." The language of echoes. In an Oxford lecture hall, Jones addresses a new generation of physicists. He no longer speaks of war or technology, but of philosophy. Every echo, he tells them, is a conversation between what we send and what returns, between intent and reality. He pauses, letting the quiet settle. Sometimes the truest part of an echo, he says, is the silence before it. The students listen in stillness. Some take notes. Some simply look at him, a man who has turned noise into understanding. Aside to the listener. You might think of listening as passive, a lack of action. But to Jones, and perhaps to anyone who has lived through noise, listening is the purest act of will. To listen is to wait for truth to come back, to trust that it will, to let reflection teach you patience. Perhaps that is why the world still hums, not out of paranoia, but habit, the habit of caring about what might return. Reflections without fear. It is 1972. Jones visits a meteorological station on the coast of Devon. The radar dish turns slowly in drizzle, measuring rainfall for farmers and fishermen. A young technician recognizes him. "Professor Jones, your work made all this possible," she says. He smiles, half embarrassed. "I only taught the weather to introduce itself. They laugh, and for a moment, the war feels impossibly far away. He stands outside afterward, watching raindrops hit puddles. Each ripple expands, meets another, merges, a quiet geometry of connection. He feels something like peace. The planet that listens back. By the end of the decade, the first satellite images of deforestation appear. Scientists overlay them year by year, seeing, in reflection, the slow wound of the Earth. Jones receives the report and studies it in silence. He realizes the same technology that once guarded nations is now guarding the planet itself. The echo has grown wiser. He writes one final note before leaving his office for the last time. We began by fearing what might come from the sky. Now we listen to protect what's beneath it. Outside, gulls circle the coastline. The dish continues to turn, slow and patient, catching rain, catching time. Somewhere deep in its hum, the world is still learning to listen. Chapter 6. The Memory of Light. Evening settles differently when you've spent a lifetime chasing signals. For most people, twilight means quiet. For R. V. Jones, it is the hour when reflection grows visible. The room of instruments. His study smells of dust and ozone. Coils of wire, notebooks, and half-assembled devices fill the shelves. In the corner, a small cathode ray tube hums faintly, a relic from another century, still obedient, still alive. He sits at the desk, spectacles balanced low, light from the lamp spilling over graphs and memories. Outside, the sky fades to the color of copper. Each evening, he performs the same ritual. Switch on the old set, tune through the static, and listen to the faint whisper of nothing. To anyone else it would be emptiness. To him it is presence, the sound of the world remembering itself. Letters unsent. There's a drawer in his desk filled with unfinished letters. One to a former student, one to a German colleague, one to Eileen, his wife, long gone. In one draft he writes, "We thought we built machines to measure distance, but we built them to measure ourselves." He never sends it. The words feel too final, too complete. He keeps the drawer open, as if the sentences need air. The long reflection. He visits an old radar tower near Dover. The structure is rusted now, paint peeling, gulls nesting in the rafters. He climbs the stairs slowly, hand brushing the cold steel rails, each step a year. At the top, the sea spreads beneath him, grey, infinite, forgiving. He remembers standing here as a young man, listening to echoes that carried both salvation and sorrow. Now there is only the wind. He closes his eyes and imagines the pulses still travelling, bouncing endlessly between sky and water, ghosts of all those signals he once sent. Every wave remembers its source, he thinks, even after the sender is gone. Aside to the listener. You might wonder what becomes of sound after it dies, where the whisper goes once it leaves the mouth. Physicists will tell you, it fades, disperses, turns into heat, into motion, into almost nothing. But there's another kind of echo, the one made of thought, and that kind never disappears. It travels through people, through choices and inventions, through stories like this one. You are hearing one now, somewhere between fact and remembrance. That is what it means to live in the memory of light. The interview. Late in life, a young journalist visits him. Her recorder clicks softly between them. "Professor Jones," she asks, "do you ever regret teaching the world to deceive?" He thinks for a long moment, the way only old men can think, slowly enough for honesty to arrive. "No," he says at last. "I regret that we learned to deceive ourselves so easily." The journalist waits. He looks out the window, where rain streaks across the glass like signal traces. "Truth," he says quietly, "was never about certainty. It was about listening carefully enough to doubt." The photograph. On his wall hangs a black and white photograph. A young man beside a radar tower, wind in his coat, determination in his eyes. Sometimes he studies it as if it belonged to someone else. In a way, it does. That man believed knowledge could protect the world. This one knows it can only illuminate it. He doesn't envy his younger self. He envies the clarity. The lantern. One night, the power flickers. The lamp sputters, then dies. He finds an old lantern in the cupboard, strikes a match, and watches light bloom through glass. It's different from electricity, warmer, slower, alive. He sets it beside the cathode ray tube and smiles. Two kinds of light, one born of flame, one of signal, both trying to hold back the dark. He whispers to the empty room. After all, that's all any of us ever did. Closing the circuit. He returns to his desk, writes one last note in the margin of a blank page. Reflection is not repetition. It's the universe checking whether it still remembers. He leaves the notebook open, as if waiting for an answer. Outside, dawn begins to color the edges of the sky. For a moment, the old tube flickers on its own. One final pulse of green, a signal sent, received, and at last understood. Chapter 7. Echo Chamber. By the time the century turns, the world hums louder than ever, not in anger, in conversation. Billions of signals, crossing oceans, circling satellites, each one saying the same thing in 1,000 different ways. I'm here. Do you hear me? The network of mirrors. The Cold War has cooled, but its architecture remains. Every radar tower has become a cell tower. Every wire once built for vigilance now carries laughter, commerce, distraction. The air that once trembled with warning now pulses with connection. Yet the shape of it, the rhythm, feels familiar. Jones would have recognized it instantly. This, too, is reflection, only faster, only louder. From orbit, satellites trace invisible lattices over the globe. The same geometry he once drew on chalkboards in smoke-filled rooms. The sky has become a library of echoes. Voices without weight. In a London cafe, decades after Jones's passing, students scroll through glowing screens. They speak in bursts, quick, transient, each sentence bouncing from one glass surface to another. Their words travel farther in a second than any radar pulse he ever launched. But when they look up, their eyes are tired, as if from listening too long to themselves. Somewhere, A newsfeed scrolls through crises. Storms tracked by satellites. Wars live-streamed in color. The instruments he helped design have made the planet transparent. And yet, truth seems harder to see. The long return. High above the Atlantic, a weather satellite drifts in quiet orbit. Its sensors map cloud cover. Its radar penetrates storms. Among its circuits, the same principle hums. Send, wait, return. Below, a child asleep in Reykjavik dreams under the same frequencies, wrapped in the same invisible web of vigilance. Every pulse Jones once sent into the sky is still out there somewhere, weakened but endless, a soft vibration of care. If you could hear them all at once, they'd sound like rain. The Museum of Signals. In a small hall at the Science Museum, a brass plaque bears his name. Beside it, an old radar console glows faintly, a ghost light from another age. Visitors pass by, murmuring. Children press buttons. Screens replay the blips of a world newly awake. None of them notice the faint warmth, still emanating from the cathode glass. It's not electricity, it's memory. Every machine remembers its purpose, even when we've forgotten. Aside to the listener. You live now in the echo Jones began. Every message you send, every signal you trust, travels through the same quiet faith that something unseen will answer. It's the same principle, reversed and multiplied, the universe replying to itself. You might not think of it this way, but each click, each connection, is a small act of hope, and hope, like radar, requires both silence and return. The inheritance. When the first global positioning satellites launched, engineers quoted Jones's early papers without knowing his name. The equations survived, even if their author faded into history. That is how reflections work. They preserve the shape, not the face. Yet his influence lingers, not as ownership, but as guidance. Every map, every forecast, every transmission is a fragment of his original whisper. Listen carefully. The world is speaking. The mirror of empathy. Sometimes, late at night, in homes lit by quiet screens, people watch the earth turning in real time, storms forming, ice melting, the pulse of the planet visible and fragile. They do not realize that the same frequencies once carried fear. Now they carry awareness, compassion, even. Technology has learned to feel, or perhaps people have learned to listen again. The human echo. You might close your eyes now and hear the faint murmur of devices around you, the refrigerator's pulse, the phone's breathing light, the soft hum of the wireless network. It's not noise, it's continuation, proof that we are still talking, still reflecting, still waiting for the signal that means we're understood. Somewhere, between the hiss of static and the glow of the screen, the spirit of R.V. Jones endures, not in machines, but in the instinct that made them, the need to listen, the courage to doubt, the grace to believe in return. Chapter 8. The Light That Remembers Us. Light remembers everything. It carries what it touches, faces, walls, oceans, grief, and folds it quietly into the past. Even now, every signal ever sent still drifts somewhere in the dark, too faint to find, too proud to fade. Perhaps memory works the same way. The world in the wires. The machines Jones built to see the enemy now see storms, forests, galaxies. They have outgrown fear. They have become instruments of wonder. On a clear night, the sky hums with the traffic of satellites. Each one blinks in silence, a bead of moving starlight across eternity. Every orbit a reminder that the human need to watch was never about control. It was about care. And maybe that's what he left behind. Not invention, but attention. The last equation. In his final years, Jones wrote less about war and more about balance. He filled his journals with fragments. Every measurement carries mercy. Reflection demands responsibility. To detect is to protect, unless we forget why we looked. He never finished a memoir. He said history was too loud already. Instead, he left notes. Small, precise, almost prayer-like. His handwriting was steady until the end. Each line a frequency drawn in ink. If you hold them under light, you can almost see the rhythm of his thought, like radar pulses made visible. The sea beneath the signal. Years later, a researcher finds his old notebooks and brings them to a coastal archive. They rest there now, pages curled by humidity, smelling faintly of salt and dust. Outside, the tide moves with the patience of a machine. Gulls sweep the same air that once carried waves of radio. Everything repeats, but softer. If you listen long enough, you might hear it, the distant hum beneath the wind, the world rehearsing what it learned from him. That listening is its own form of prayer. Aside to the listener. You've been listening too, through static, through silence, through the spaces between words. And maybe that's the point. That memory isn't what stays, but what returns. That light, once sent, never dies. It only drifts until someone looks up and notices. If you look up now, you might see a faint pulse moving through the night sky. It's not a star. It's not a plane. It's the echo of understanding, a signal from another time, still searching for home. The window. At the end of his life, Jones's office faced west. Each evening, as the sun dipped, the glass would catch a brief flare of reflection, a small, golden echo of the day. He used to pause his work, turn toward that light, and whisper, almost playfully, "Still there." It was his way of measuring continuity, of checking that the world still answered back. And it always did. The room is dark now. The instruments are still. But the light that passed through that window once has traveled outward, through air, through space, through memory, and somewhere it's still moving, still remembering, still returning. Chapter 9. The Afterglow. The war ended long ago, but its frequencies never stopped moving. They faded, softened, folded themselves into the background hum of the world. You can hear them now, if you listen carefully enough, not as sound, but as patience, the patience of light finding its way home. the shore of signals. The tide is out along the English coast. Pebbles glint like circuitry in the dusk. Wind moves through the grass, and the old radar foundations lie half buried in sand, their cables long gone, their ghosts intact. Even without power, you can sense their rhythm, as if the earth itself still remembers the hum. Each gust of wind carries it, a soft, invisible song, a hymn for vigilance, a requiem for invention. The continuum. The world Jones helped awaken has grown vast, every ship tracked, every cloud mapped, every whisper carried by invisible threads, and yet, beneath all the noise, the same truth remains, that every act of perception is also an act of care. Technology was never about control. It was the universe learning empathy. And maybe that's what he gave us. Not machines, but mirrors. Ways to see ourselves in motion. Ways to remember that we exist because we are observed. The quiet return. Evening settles across the channel. The horizon glows faintly, as if lit from within. Somewhere beyond sight, a signal bounces once, twice, then fades into the ocean of static that encircles the planet. Its message is simple, still listening, and that is enough. Aside to the listener. You've walked a long way through this silence, through rooms of shadow, through hums and reflections, through the soft machinery of conscience. You've listened to a man who taught the sky to see, and in doing so, helped the world remember itself. If there's a moral, it's not grand. It's this: that light, once born, never truly belongs to anyone. It travels on, gathering meaning as it moves, until one night, it reaches you, and in that instant of understanding, you become part of the return. The last reflection. Dawn comes quietly over the sea. Mist glows faintly where the towers once stood. The water breathes against the shore, each wave a pulse, each retreat a pause. The world is calm again, not innocent, but wiser, every frequency gentled into memory. Somewhere, the faintest whisper of radar still sweeps across empty skies, a trace of vigilance turned into peace. And for a heartbeat, the earth feels whole. You stand there, watching the horizon breathe. The air smells of salt, and the first gull of morning drifts across the light. You can almost hear it, the last echo folding into silence, the afterglow of a century that learned to listen. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.